Hello students, in this session we will discuss about another advanced applications related to the database system that is called as big data. So you might have heard about the term big data nowadays. So this is the concept or the technology that is related to the situation where we cannot deal with the data that is with our traditional database system. So we are having a different approach that is called as big data, where we can have the management of huge amount of data for certain applications. So we will see some introduction to the big data management, the different features of big data, the different tools used for managing big data. Similarly, we will see some of the applications where we are using the concept of big data. So what is actually big data? As the name indicates, the data that is big can be called as big data. So as you know, we are dealing with data with a very small set of data in the case of normal file system. Then we had the concept of the database system, where we can manage more number of data, especially in a structured format, by using DBMS tools like Oracle, etc. But there is also some limitations, like we cannot deal with a huge number of data by using traditional database management tools. So what is big data actually? So we can define big data as a collection of data sets. So data set can be any data which is either in structured or non-unstructured format, where we require these data sets for different types of manipulations, analysis, comparisons, etc. So big data is a collection of data sets. So it is a type of data set, but the specialty of that data set is the data set is larger in size and they are also complex. So big data is a collection of data set that is very large and complex, and also it is difficult to process the same data by using the traditional database management tools like Oracle. So big data is a special category of data. Two main points, like the data is large and the data is complex also, and this cannot be managed by the normal DBMS system. So big data is a term that is it is a very popular term nowadays, and it is used to describe the exponential growth and the availability of data in the terms of both structured and unstructured data. So as the years are passing, we are in the requirement of more number of data. So all of us are most of the time we are using social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, etc. So if we imagine the amount of data that is being transferred through these social media platform in a day wise or a week wise or month wise, if you see that, it is actually a very huge amount of data that is being transferred through these social media platform. So every day we are in the situation where we need to use more number of data or huge amount of data. So big data actually indicates the term that is the description of exponential growth and more availability of data in structured as well as unstructured format. Also, the big data, the term also applies to the information that cannot be processed by or analyzed by the traditional tools like DBMS system, or even with some other tools like some of the data mining tools and all. They can also process some larger data sets. Even bigger than that data, it is not possible to manage, because if the quantity of data is very huge, it is always a time consuming task, and also it requires more background support for the processing or the execution of those data. So big data, we have seen the definition of big data. and where does this term comes, and which all application or the specialty of big data is it cannot be processed by traditional database systems. So first of all, we will see the basic characteristics of big data. So when we consider these huge quantity of data or larger data set, we are basically considering three characteristics. That is the first one, that is volume, second one is variety, and third one is velocity. So the three major properties or characteristics of big data is, one is volume in the sense, as you know, volume, more quantity, more amount of data will be there with big data. We will see that in detail. And also we can have different varieties of data. These big data can be of different types. Similarly, the third characteristics that includes the velocity. Velocity means the speed in which, how often this data is moving between different sites. That means how often this data is receiving, whether it is a streaming type data or it is a batch type data, whether each data will be coming time by time or whether it will be streaming dynamically. So depending on that, we can decide the property called as velocity. So big data can be have the following characteristics: the volume, that is the quantity; variety, that means the type of data; velocity, the speed in which the data is moving. So we will see one pictorial representation of these three terms: volume, variety, and velocity. So what is this volume? Volume, as I have mentioned, nowadays we are in the requirement of more amount of data. So we can see we are normally in the mobile phones and all, we are using megabytes, gigabytes. So we are maximum thinking about GBs. But these big data are actually dealing with more than GBs, like terabytes, and even more than that, that is zettabytes. So so more GBs are combined to form terabytes, and more terabytes are combined to form zettabytes. That means the volume of data is very huge. That is what to say, that we cannot imagine on the total quantity or the size of that particular data that we are going to analyze or process. So volume is the property or the characteristics that is associated with the big data. Then the second one is variety. So different varieties of data. So what are those varieties? So mainly data can be divided into two. One is structured data and second one is unstructured data. So either the data that we are considered can be structured, so entire data that we are taken from different machines, different networks, maybe sometimes the data can be structured. It is having a proper structure, it is having some attribute and corresponding values. All the data are aligned or they are stored in a fixed format. Then we can call it as a structured data. But sometimes the data may be mixture of both structured as well as unstructured data. So what is this unstructured data? Unstructured data means there won't be any specific attribute value combination, or the data are stored in a specific format. So it can be a video, or it can be some large document where we are having some text contents only. There is no specific format for storing that data. So different variety of data, like either only structured data or sometimes only unstructured data, and sometimes even the mixture of both structured as well as unstructured data. So we need to deal with these different varieties of data. Now comes the third characteristic, that is velocity. Velocity means how often the data is moving. So it can be either batch or it can be streaming type of data. Batch means each data time by time that will be moving from one location to another location. But streaming means dynamically, so just like we are watching the video in YouTube channel. So when we are playing a video, it is actually streaming. Or sometimes if you are watching some live program in internet or in YouTube channel, they are actually streaming. So dynamically the data is coming and dynamically we are watching that movie. But batch means it is already fixed, data is already there and we are simply playing directly, that is according to the time. But dynamic streaming means as the data is entered, so dynamically data is arriving and we are watching. Similarly, the remaining set of data will be arriving in a streaming format. It is using a different method. So both are having different velocities, the different speed for accessing or speed variation in the movement of data between the different machines when they are connected in the network. So three major properties or characteristics of big data are the volume, variety and velocity. So we'll just see the description once again. Volume. So what are the different factors that contribute to the increasing data volume? So what are the different types of data that is considered for the big data applications? One is the transaction based data. The transaction based data that is stored through the years, that means history of data. For example, if you take the data from the bank usually has different transactions, right? So if you take some last 20 years transaction data, it is actually it is in structured format, right? So if we are having those history of data, so we can imagine how much data will be available for that particular bank. So how many transactions? So if I open my account, the account statement, even that itself will be having some more number of data. So last 5 years transaction data, if I take that statement, it is having a history of data. So similarly, if you take the data for a branch, or if you take the data for an entire bank, it will be a very huge amount of data. So this is one of the place where we are receiving this huge amount of data or huge volume of data. Now similarly, so this transaction based data can be considered as the structured type of data. So second one, unstructured data, which is usually streaming through the social media platforms. That means we are simply receiving some videos, some text documents, some large documents, etc. etc. So we will see some of the examples of volume of data that is being generated by different social media platforms. Like for example, Twitter alone generates more than 7 terabytes of data. So how much data is being generated by Twitter? Maybe within a single day itself, it is in a very huge quantity. So 7 terabytes. So terabytes is larger than gigabytes. So gigabyte itself is very large. Now terabytes, 7 terabytes. So 1 terabyte itself is very huge than gigabytes. So 7 terabytes means we can imagine what will be the size of the data generated by the Twitter platform. Similarly, Facebook is even more than 10 terabytes. Similarly, the situation where we are drowning in data. So we are using this term like drowning in data means the data is already available, the huge amount of data is available, but we are not getting any data. So we need to find some particular data from the entire set of data. So huge volume of data, when we are having huge volume of data available and selecting or finding some data from that huge amount of data must be considered as a point when we are using the big data analytics. So drowning in data is one of the point related to the volume, means from huge volume how to find a particular data. Similarly, some organizations don't even know how to manage these big data. So very larger social media platforms, they are having the provision for managing this big data, but even many other organizations, they even don't know how to manage this big data in this larger volume. So this is the first characteristic. Now you will see one graph where in many organizations, so this is the way in which the availability of data, the data available to an organization is moving upwards day by day, the data that is available. So every day when we see, we are actually increasing the amount of data that is being added to the particular organization. But in this side we can see this area is going down. That means the percentage of data that the organization can process is so as the number of data increases, the percentage of data that can be processed by the industry is being going down. Okay, so the volume of data available to organization today is on rise, so that is here, but the percentage of data that can analyze is on a decline. It is going downwards. So now you can imagine, so every day we are in the requirement of more amount of data. We are receiving data, we are dealing with data, but the processing, the real processing of that data is becoming very difficult nowadays. Now let us look into the second property, characteristic of big data, that is called as variety. So as you know, the data today comes in different types of formats. It can be the structured data, that is the different numeric data that is stored in traditional databases. So that is one variety of data. Similarly, unstructured data like text documents, email, video, audio, stock related data. Similarly, bank transaction, all these are considered as unstructured data. So this is another variety of data. Structured, proper aligned formatted text can be called as structured data. That is one variety of data, and similarly different type of unstructured data are also available as a variety of data. Similarly, for managing and for merging these data of different varieties and governing these different varieties of data is something many organizations still grapple with. Means they are facing many difficulties to deal with these different varieties of data. So the second characteristic, that is variety, different varieties of data to be handled by using big data and by different organizations. The varieties of data are generally the structured data and unstructured data. Now the third characteristic is velocity, the pace, the speed in which the data moves. So data is streaming in an unprecedented speed when we are using many social media platform, and when we are using this data streaming in different speeds, because when we are dealing with these data, we will be receiving by using different speeds, network speed and streaming speed depending on the processor, etc. So we will be getting the data in different speed. So we need to deal with this data in a timely manner according to the situation. So management of these data in terms of velocity, in what speed it is arriving, accordingly according to that particular time, according to the speed at which that data arrives, that is to be managed. So reacting quickly to deal with data velocity is a challenge for most of the organizations. So when the data is dynamically arriving in a streamed format in different speed, and reacting to that in a quick manner is actually a challenge for all of the organizations. So the third characteristic, that is velocity. So we have seen three characteristics, that is volume, variety and velocity. So this is actually called as 3 V's of big data. 3 V's of big data, that is volume, variety and velocity. So these 3 points are very, very important. So these are the features of all the data that are considered as big data. 3 V's: volume, variety and velocity. Now, along with these three basic characteristics, we are having two more dimensions or two more characteristics that is to be considered with big data. One is variability. Variability means change. There will be some changes in data. So, in addition to the increasing velocity, so speed is already varying, we are having varieties of data. Okay, so we are having different velocities, we are having different varieties, and similarly the data that is flowing may be inconsistent. That means the data may change. We cannot always say that the data is consistent. So sometimes the data may change from one particular state to another state. So we cannot always say that the data will be in the same state. So it will be inconsistent. So the data may vary. The data status may vary while flowing between different machines. That is by or with periodic peaks. So sometimes more data will be coming, sometimes less number of data will be coming, sometimes the data itself, the value may vary depending on the situation. So we can have the provision or chances of variability, changes in or inconsistencies to the data that is part of big data. So sometimes we are considering daily data, seasonal data, and even triggered peak data. All are so managing all these different types of data. Maybe daily that status graph and seasonal graph, they will be different. So we are getting different variety. So if you take a business in a normal working day business and in a festival season working day business, they are having different, that means there are variations in the movement of data. So it may vary, the trend is varying, market is varying. So this is a challenging task to manage with the organization that are dealing with this big data. So this is the fourth characteristic. So that this is the one additional dimensions that is added to the characteristic of big data. Similarly, complexity. What is complexity? So the data comes from different sources. So as you know, this big data, it is not stored in a single system. The data is actually distributed over different machines, and different machines are in different locations, and those locations or those sources, they are using different platforms. So as the data is received from different multiple sources, it will be sometimes complex to deal with these data that is part of big data. So it is a difficult task to link those data that is coming from different sources and matching the data and transforming the data received from different sources across the distributed system is a complex task. So it is necessary to connect and correlate the different relationships, the different hierarchies and data linkages between the data received from different multiple sources. So complexity is also a characteristic of big data that the different organizations are dealing with. So totally we can have 5 characteristics. First three V's and 2 more additional parameters that we are adding are variability and complexity. Now, why big data is, the term big data or the concept big data is important? So let us see some of the situations when we are using this big data management. So the big data solutions are ideal for analyzing not only the structured data but also to the semi-structured as well as unstructured data from different varieties of sources. So if we are having some big data solution, if you are having some tool for managing this big data, it will be ideal for analyzing different types of data like structured, semi-structured and unstructured data that are received from different sources. Similarly, the big data solutions are useful when most of the data needs to be analyzed versus a sample of data. So a huge amount of data and a small sample. If they are to be analyzed, we can utilize big data solutions. So it will be more effective when we are using or when we are comparing that small sample with a large set of data. We can have different derive analysis on those means the sample that is received from small data, and based on that we can have some analysis on the huge amount of data. Similarly, this solution, big data solution, is also ideal for iterative and exploratory analysis, that is related to the experimental analysis and repeated analysis when we are dealing with the data related to the business, that the data that are not predetermined. So the data that we are receiving through the daily market trends and all, we need to have some manipulation or analysis on those data that is received in a very huge amount. So let us see the architecture of big data. What is how this will be executed? So normally the huge data is already there. So it is to be distributed, that we will discuss later. So querying of these huge data is normally done by the modified version of C++ that is called as ECL, that uses an apply scheme on read method. So the method that is followed in ECL for dealing with this big data is applying the data on the read method to create structure of stored data during time of query. So it is using some special methods part of ECL language for manipulating this huge amount of data. So the programming paradigm or the concept that we are used for managing this big data is actually called as MapReduce, which is created by Google in the year 2004. So MapReduce is a mechanism, a paradigm that is used to deal with this big data. So MapReduce is a framework that provides the parallel processing of these big data, and it is not only doing parallel processing on this data, it is also doing the associated implementation to process the huge amount of data in this big data platform. So MapReduce is a very important term. MapReduce is a framework, or it is a paradigm or a concept that is used for dealing with big data. It is a framework or a concept. So it is following parallel processing. So more data to be processed in parallel. So that is the only way to deal with this huge amount of data. So with MapReduce, the different queries that are submitted, they are being splitted and they are being distributed, that I was already mentioning there. We need to have a distribution. So the queries are split and they are distributed across different nodes, different parallel nodes, and they are being processed in parallel. So that is the first step. So as the name indicates, MapReduce consists of two stages. One is the map stage and second one is the reduce stage. So in the map stage, the queries are split and they are being distributed across different parallel nodes. Now after the distribution, the results are then gathered and delivered in the second stage, that is called as the reduce step. The final result is being produced during the second stage, that is called as reduce. So that is why the term MapReduce. MapReduce is a framework that consists of two stages, map and reduce. In the map stage, initial queries are being splitted and it is distributed over different parallel nodes. And in the reduce stage, it will collect the result, it will gather the result and the result will be delivered. So some parallel mechanism is being followed for this MapReduce architecture. So an implementation of the MapReduce framework was adopted by the Apache project that is called as Hadoop. So Hadoop is an Apache implementation or Apache a project under which a MapReduce basic concept, that concept is being implemented. That is very commonly used nowadays. So Hadoop is a project where we are having a MapReduce implementation. So MapReduce in common, it is having a function, but there are several projects where the MapReduce concept is being used. So Hadoop is one of the main open source project. It is Apache's open source project where the MapReduce is being implemented under the Hadoop architecture. So the different technologies where we are applying this big data, that is A/B testing, which is related to data science. Similarly, crowdsourcing, getting the different informations from, getting the input from a huge crowd. Similarly, data fusion, integration, genetic algorithms, different machine learning algorithms, NLP, natural language processing, digital signal processing, simulation, and time series analysis and visualizations. So these are the traditional research areas where we are applying the concept of big data. So traditional data mining, then now we are dealing with big data. So even with these social media platform data and other organizational data, we need to manage these type of algorithms. So there we need to use this huge data as input, and we need to follow this mechanism for managing this big data. So multidimensional big data can also be represented as tensors. So tensors are actually some mathematical object for representing some multilinear data that is part of a mathematical object. So that is one application. So these are the different applications where we are using big data. It is also used with tensor applications or tensor based computation, mathematical object based computation. Similarly, additional technologies that are applied to big data, that includes MPP, that is massive parallel processing databases. Similarly, search based applications, then data mining related applications, distributed file system related applications, distributed database related applications, and also cloud based infrastructure applications. They are mainly used with the internet. Okay, so these are the different technologies that are part of, or that are adopting the concept of big data. Then the different uses of big data. So nowadays organizations are increasingly turning to big data to discover new ways to improve the decision making. So decision making, different decisions. So especially in the business field and all, they need to have some crucial decision making based on the current trend and all. Even in the stock market and similar tradings and all, they need to have some proper decision making. Similarly, for making opportunities and also for identifying the overall performance of different organizations. Similarly, the different operational insights might depend on the machine data, which can include anything from the computers that so these, for making these decision making opportunities and overall performance, it will depend on the data that are actually captured from the computers or sensors or some other devices like GPS and all. So big data provides some unprecedented insight on customers' decision making process by allowing companies to track and analyze shopping patterns. So when we are using Amazon, we can see that Amazon trends, what are the current trends, we can see different analysis. Similar recommendations, if I buy one product, and they'll be providing some recommendations based on the currently bought product. Similarly, purchasing behavior, which product is having more trends and all. So all these can be done by using the big data that is received from more number of nodes. That is part of the network. So also big data can be applicable to cyber security and fraud detection in that is with real-time data and all. When we are dealing with different data like business related or artificial intelligence related data, when we are doing analysis and all, we can implement securities and fraud detection on those crucial data. For that purpose also we can apply the concept of big data. Then the big data market. The challenge of big data is to convert it into usable information. So we are having huge amount of data available, very huge amount, terabytes, zettabytes data are available. So we need to convert that into some useful information by identifying some patterns, some trends, some deviations, etc. So among the private industry providers, the companies that are following this big data is like SAP, Sybase, Q, Oracle Big Data Appliance, HP Information Optimization Solutions, and IBM Big Data Platform. So all of these industries are providers of this big data platform. Similarly, the open source providers are like Apache, Hadoop that I have already mentioned. Similarly, cascading, Apache HBase, and MongoDB. All these are again the different open source providers for the big data analytics. So it is big data is a typically a division of the information technology department and requires people highly skilled in programming and data analysis to extract the information from the huge data. So for managing the big data or doing some analysis on the big data, we need to have some people who are very good in information technology, and they should be highly skilled. So that is all for this session. So we were discussing about big data, a new type of data sets. So we have defined what is big data. We have seen different characteristics, basic 3 V's, 3 characteristics. In addition to that, we have seen 2 more additional dimensions on big data. Then we have seen the different uses of big data, where we are using this big data concept, the different tools used for manipulating, or the framework and the projects used for dealing with big data. And also we have seen the different trends in the usage of big data analytics. So we will see in detail about MapReduce and Hadoop in detail in the next session. Thank you.